This is for real founders.
Incubators are not rescue programs for shop clerks. Dean Howard Pierce said it into a live microphone. His voice carried across the glass-roofed atrium of the Denver campus startup fair, reaching the student founders beside their polished displays. The investors seated near the demonstration stage and the volunteers wearing badges that said, "Build the Future," near the registration table. Alina Moore stood with one hand beneath her pregnant belly and the other holding a thin silver folder against her chest. She wore the Navy store apron she had forgotten to remove after leaving her shift at the neighborhood grocery. A faint streak of flour marked one pocket. Her shoes were damp from the snow outside. Howard's gaze dropped to the silver letters on the folder. GED Preparation Program. A few students followed his eyes. One whispered something to another. A nervous laugh escaped from somewhere behind the sponsor banner. Howard smiled as though he had just identified an administrative error. "You were told this event is for university-affiliated founders," he continued. "Not for people hoping a personal hardship will substitute for qualifications." Alina's grip tightened around the folder, bending one corner. "I'm not asking you to substitute anything," she said. Her voice was quiet, but the microphone caught it. Howard reached for the pitch badge resting on the table in front of her. The badge carried her company's name, Northline Retail Systems, and a demonstration time of 3:20 that afternoon. He lifted it between two fingers. "You listed yourself as the product architect. I am the product architect. You also listed 3 active pilot stores." "That's correct." Howard glanced towards the investors as though inviting them into the joke. "And yet you work behind a grocery counter and have not completed high school." The atrium seemed to narrow around her. Alina could hear the soft clicking of laptop keys. A camera light blinked near the stage. One investor stopped writing and watched Howard slide her badge beneath the registration clipboard. The motion was small. The consequence was not. Without that badge, she could not enter the demo queue. Without the demo, the investor panel would never see the system she had spent 18 months building between closing shifts, prenatal appointments, and GED night classes. Investor demonstrations closed at 4. The digital clock above the stage read 2:47. Alina drew a slow breath. "My application was accepted 6 weeks ago." Provisionally, Howard replied. "Applications are reviewed for credibility. You reviewed mine yesterday and corrected an oversight today." He nodded toward the exit. "Take the afternoon. Finish your studies. Build a resume. Perhaps in a few years you'll be ready to return through the proper door." Several faces lowered, not all of them. A woman from the investor panel leaned toward the man beside her. A student near the refreshments stared at the floor. Another raised his phone, uncertain whether he was recording injustice or entertainment. Alina did not cry. She did not argue about her rent the baby due in 11 weeks or the grocery shifts that began before sunrise. Instead, she opened the silver folder. Inside were practice examinations, a graduation schedule, and one folded sheet covered in inventory calculations. Beneath them lay a narrow black notebook secured with an elastic band. Howard saw only the school papers. "Putting business notes beside GED worksheets does not make them venture records," he said. Alina's thumb rested on the notebook. For 18 months, every subscription payment, repair expense, software, revision, store installation, and customer renewal had been written inside it. The first page began with $73 earned from fixing a grocer's ordering errors. The latest pages recorded money from businesses Howard had assumed were imaginary. But she did not place the notebook on his table. Not yet. Across the atrium, a store manager in a brown winter coat had just entered through the revolving doors. Snow clung to his shoulders. Under one arm, he carried a sealed sales report bearing the logo of Alina's largest pilot store. He saw her standing without a badge. Then he saw Howard. "Alina," he called. Howard's smile thinned. She raised her eyes toward the clock. 13 minutes had passed since she arrived. 73 remained before the demo doors closed. Howard lowered his voice, though the microphone still carried every word. "Do not turn this into a scene." Alina removed the black notebook from the silver folder. "I'm not going to," she said. "I'm going to show them what you refuse to read." A chair scraped near the investor table. Howard reached for the microphone switch, but the woman on the panel placed her hand over it first. Dean Pierce, she said, leave it on. He froze. The store manager began walking toward them with the sealed report. Alina held the notebook at her side, calm enough that Howard still failed to understand what was coming. Before the afternoon ended, the investors would learn who had actually built the working company, and Howard Pierce would lose the authority he had just used to silence her. But to understand why a university dean felt threatened by a pregnant clerk carrying a GED folder, the story had to begin 6 months earlier, under the flickering lights of a neighborhood grocery store after closing, when Alina discovered that one missing case of canned peaches could reveal a problem worth building a company to solve. 6 months earlier, Alina Moore stood beneath the humming fluorescent lights of Grant Street Market counting cans no customer had bought. It was 10:18 at night. The front doors were locked, the bakery racks were empty, and the last cashier had already gone home. Alina should have been cleaning Register 3, but instead she was kneeling beside aisle 7 with a clipboard balanced on one knee. The inventory sheet said the store had 24 cases of canned peaches. The shelf held 11. The stockroom held 9. 4 cases had vanished somewhere between a delivery invoice and the sales system. Alina checked the numbers again. Then she checked the dates. The peaches were not missing. The software had counted the same damaged shipment twice, then suggested another order based on sales that had never happened. By morning, the manager would approve 8 more cases they did not need. That was how Grant Street Market lost money, not through one dramatic mistake, but through hundreds of small ones no one had time to trace. Alina opened the narrow black notebook she kept beneath the register. On the left page, she wrote the product code, delivery date, and duplicate entry. On the right, she sketched a simple correction rule. Compare invoice, quantity, shelf movement, waste records, and reorder timing before approving new stock. She had filled nearly half the notebook that way. Milk that expired because the system ignored school holidays. Bread ordered too heavily before snowstorms. Cleaning supplies counted as sold when employees moved them between departments. Alina noticed patterns because she lived among them. She had worked at Grant Street Market since she was 19, first bagging groceries, then stocking shelves, then handling register corrections and delivery disputes whenever the supervisors were too busy. She earned $6.40 an hour. Her rent took almost half of every monthly paycheck. The prenatal clinic had already given her an estimate for the delivery. Even with insurance, the number sat in her kitchen drawer like a warning she avoided opening twice. At 24, Alina had no degree, no savings, and no office with her name on the door. What she had was a second-hand laptop, a black notebook, and a mind that refused to stop solving problems. A cart rattled at the end of the aisle. Mr. Calvin Ross, the store manager, appeared with his coat over one arm. He was broad-shouldered, gray-haired, and permanently tired. "You're still here. I found the peach error." Calvin sighed. "Tell me it isn't another duplicate shipment." "It is, but I think I know why it keeps happening." He glanced at the open notebook. "Alina payroll stopped 18 minutes ago." "I know. Then go home." She started to close the notebook. Calvin hesitated. How much would those extra cases have cost? $216. More if they sit too long. His hand paused on the cart. Grant Street Market had survived 43 years, but the past 12 months had been bad. 2 new chain stores had opened nearby. Waste costs were rising. Suppliers were charging more. Calvin had already cut employee hours twice. "Show me tomorrow," he said. Alina did. The next afternoon, during her lunch break, she opened a rough spreadsheet on her laptop and demonstrated how the store could flag suspicious reorders before money left the account. Calvin watched without interrupting. "Yamad, this. It's only a prototype. Does it work?" "On peaches." A reluctant smile pulled at one corner of his mouth. "That's a narrow market. It can work on everything if I connect the right records." Calvin leaned back in the folding chair. "You know, stores pay companies thousands of dollars for software like that. They pay thousands for software that still makes these mistakes." He studied her more carefully then. Alina lowered her eyes to the screen. She was used to that moment, the pause when people tried to fit what she could do beside the facts they already knew about her. Shop clerk, high school dropout, pregnant. None of those facts were false. They were simply incomplete. Alina had left school at 17 after her mother's health collapsed. Her father had disappeared years earlier, and there had been no relative waiting to take over the bills. By the time her mother died, Alina had missed too many classes to graduate with her year. She told herself she would return. Then 1 month became 6, 6 became 5 years. The silver GED folder came from a night program at the Community Learning Center. It contained test schedules, practice essays, math worksheets, and a photograph of her mother tucked behind the inside flap. In the picture, her mother stood at a grocery register in the same navy apron Alina now wore. On the back, she had written one sentence before she died. "Finish what I couldn't." Alina read that sentence whenever exhaustion made quitting feel reasonable. 3 nights a week, she attended GED classes after her shift. On the remaining nights, she worked on the inventory prototype at her kitchen table while the baby moved beneath her ribs. She called the project Northline because her mother used to say that when you felt lost, you did not need the whole map. You only needed one dependable direction. By December, Grant Street Market became Northline's first pilot store. Alina installed the tool on one back-office computer and tracked every flagged order by hand. The first month, it caught 37 errors. The second month, Calvin let her test it in produce and dairy. Waste fell. Emergency orders fell. Employees spent less time hunting for stock the system claimed they had. Calvin paid her $73 from the store's operations budget for the first working version. Alina recorded the payment on page 1 of the black notebook. That page became the beginning of her venture ledger. Soon, Calvin introduced her to 2 other local store owners. Each paid a small monthly fee. Alina recorded every dollar, every expense, and every promise she made to a customer. She did not call herself a founder. Not yet. She called herself someone testing whether an idea worked. Then, one cold morning in February, a customer left a university flyer beside Register 3. Denver Campus Startup Fair, local founders welcome finalists pitch to regional investors. Applications closed that night. Alina read the qualifications twice. The fair required a working product pilot results and evidence of customer demand. It did not require a degree. During her break, she completed the application from her phone. 6 weeks later, an acceptance email arrived. Her demonstration slot was scheduled for 3:20 on a Thursday afternoon, the same day as her final GED practice examination. Alina placed the printed acceptance inside the silver folder beside her graduation schedule. For the first time, the 2 paths she had been building in secret rested together in the same place. She thought that meant both doors were finally opening. She did not yet know Dean Howard Pierce had begun reviewing the finalist list. And when he reached her name, he did not ask whether Northline worked. He asked how a grocery clerk had been allowed onto his stage. Dean Howard Pierce had built his career around appearing generous to people who already knew how to enter the room. At university events, he spoke about access opportunity and finding brilliance beyond traditional pathways. His photograph appeared beside scholarship announcements and startup competitions. He shook hands with student founders beneath banners printed with words like inclusion and innovation. Privately, Howard trusted credentials more than ideas. A founder with a degree made the incubator look selective. A founder with wealthy parents made it look connected. A founder from a respected program made his judgment appear intelligent before the company had produced anything at all. Alina Moore offered him none of that protection. When her application reached his desk, Howard opened the resume first. Grant Street Market Shop Clerk. GED candidate. No university affiliation. He almost rejected her without reading further. Then he noticed the application had already passed the technical review. Northline Retail Systems showed 3 pilot customers, monthly revenue, and measurable reductions in inventory waste. A junior reviewer had marked the project as one of the strongest operational tools in the local founder category. Howard called the reviewer into his office. There must be a classification error, he said. The reviewer pointed to the published rules. The community track is open to local founders. She qualifies. Qualifying is not the same as belonging. Howard removed his glasses and placed them carefully on the desk. The Startup Fair was his most visible event of the year. Regional investors would attend. University trustees would tour the finalists. If the strongest community applicant turned out to be a pregnant grocery clerk studying for a GED, Howard feared the story would become about how little his institution had contributed to her success. He preferred founders whose achievements could be credited to his programs. So he created a new obstacle. 3 days before the fair. Alina received an email requesting proof that she was the original product architect. The message asked for development history, customer verification, and evidence of business ownership. None of those items had appeared in the application rules. Alina read the email during her break while customers lined up beneath the express lane sign. Calvin found her standing beside Register 3 with her phone in one hand. Problem: they want more records. Did they say why? They called it a routine credibility review. Calvin's expression hardened. Routine for whom? Alina did not answer. She spent that night organizing the venture ledger. Each page showed a date, a payment, a software change, or a customer request. She matched the entries to invoices from the 3 pilot stores and placed the most recent performance summary behind them. The supporting sales report was not finished yet. Calvin's accountant was still confirming the final numbers, but Alina sent everything the university had requested before midnight. The next morning, Howard replied with one sentence: "Received. Final participation remains subject to on-site verification." Alina recognized the message for what it was. He had not found a reason to remove her, so he had preserved the right to invent one later. Still, she could not walk away. Northline had reached the point where a small mistake could end it. Her laptop was failing. One pilot store wanted an expanded version she could not afford to build. Another had warned that unless she improved the reporting dashboard, it might return to its old supplier. The startup fair offered more than prize money. Finalists could receive seed funding, technical support, and introductions to investors who understood retail systems. Alina did not need someone to rescue her company. She needed enough time and equipment to keep the work alive. 2 days before the fair, Howard visited Grant Street Market without warning. He arrived at 11:30 in a charcoal coat and polished shoes, accompanied by a student assistant holding a tablet. Howard introduced himself to Calvin, then asked to see the Northline system. Alina was stocking cereal when Calvin called her to the office. Howard's attention went first to her apron, then to her stomach. "You're Miss Moore." "Yes. I expected someone from your development team." "You're speaking to the development team." The student assistant stopped typing. Howard entered the cramped office and examined the aging computer on the desk. Northline's dashboard displayed a list of flagged orders and projected waste reductions. He clicked through 2 screens without asking permission. This interface is fairly basic. It was designed for stores that don't have technical staff. "And you coded it yourself?" "Yes." "Using what training?" "Online courses, public documentation, and 5 years of working with the store's inventory problems." Howard gave a quiet hum that made her answer sound childish. He asked her to explain how the system separated genuine sales growth from ordering errors. Alina walked him through the rules, the comparison model, and the way Northline checked supplier records against shelf movement. Halfway through, Howard interrupted. "You've learned enough terminology to present this convincingly." Alina paused. "I built it, so you've said." Calvin shifted beside the filing cabinet. "Dean Pierce, that tool has saved this store thousands of dollars." Howard faced him with a practiced smile. "I'm sure Ms. Moore has been helpful, but investor presentations require a higher standard than workplace enthusiasm." Calvin opened his mouth, but Alina spoke first. "What standard am I missing?" Howard adjusted one cuff. "Formal preparation, documented technical mentorship, an established professional environment. Something demonstrating that this is a scalable venture rather than an unusually organized employee improving her own workplace." The insult was delivered gently enough that he could deny making it. Alina gestured toward the screen. "The other 2 stores aren't my workplace." "Yes, but they are small neighborhood businesses connected through your manager. They pay for the product. For now." A delivery alarm sounded in the stockroom. Calvin had to leave, but before he did, he told Howard the final pilot report would be completed before the fair. Howard's eyes narrowed slightly. "What report?" 6 months of store performance," Alina said. "Sales, waste, ordering time, and inventory accuracy. That should have been included earlier. You asked for customer verification 3 days ago. I asked for credible evidence." The distinction revealed more than Howard intended. Alina closed the dashboard. "You came here hoping not to find any." The student assistant raised her eyes from the tablet. Howard's expression remained calm, but a flush rose above his collar. "I came here to protect the reputation of a serious investor event. From my software. From misrepresentation. He removed a temporary access card from his coat and set it on the desk. The card would admit Alina to the fair, but a red stripe across the bottom read, "Conditional Participant." Bring every original record, he said. If anything cannot be verified on site, your demonstration will be reassigned. After he left, Alina stared at the card. Calvin returned carrying a delivery invoice. He didn't come to inspect the product. No, he came to make you nervous. Alina opened the silver folder and placed the conditional card inside. Behind it rested her GED graduation schedule and the photograph of her mother. For a moment, the folder seemed to contain two versions of her life, the one she was still trying to complete, and the one Howard had already decided did not count. Then, Calvin placed the delivery invoice beside her black notebook. The accountant found something he said. Northline didn't just cut waste. Alina read the figures at the bottom of the page. Across 6 months, Grant Street Market had processed more orders with fewer shortages. Popular products stayed available longer. Lost sales had fallen sharply. Calvin tapped the final column. When the official report is signed, they won't be able to call this workplace enthusiasm. Alina slipped the invoice behind the venture ledger. For the first time, Howard had nearly seen the proof that could undo him. His mistake was believing he still had time to keep it off the stage. The morning of the startup fair began with a broken freezer alarm at 6:12. Alina was already inside Grant Street Market, standing beside the dairy cases while a red warning light blinked above the temperature display. Her demonstration clothes hung in a garment bag inside Calvin's office. The silver folder rested beside her laptop. She had planned to work only half a shift. Instead, she spent 40 minutes helping Calvin trace which refrigerated products had been exposed and which inventory records needed correction. Northline identified the affected batches before the old store system finished loading. Calvin printed the list and handed it to the morning crew. That alone should be your demonstration. It's not enough for Howard. It should be enough for anyone. Alina checked the time. Her final GED practice examination began at 10. The startup fair opened at noon. Her investor demonstration was scheduled for 3:20. She had built the day down to the minute. At 7:05, her phone vibrated. The message came from the university events office. Your finalist status remains under review. Please report to the verification desk no later than 1:30 p.m. Failure to complete verification may result in reassignment of your slot. Alina read it twice. The original check-in deadline had been 2:30. She forwarded the message to Howard and asked why it had changed. No reply came. Calvin read the email over her shoulder. They moved it because they know about your test. Alina had included her GED schedule when she first requested a late check-in. They know I can't be there by 1:30. Then skip the practice exam. She shook her head. The exam determined whether she could sit for the final equivalency tests the following month. Missing it meant waiting for the next session and losing the graduation date printed inside her folder. Howard had found the one deadline she would not abandon. Calvin lowered his voice. Alina, I know what that date means to you. So does he. She closed the message and returned to the freezer records. Well, at 9, the store accountant called. The pilot sales report was complete, but the signed copy would not be ready until after lunch. Calvin arranged to collect it and bring it directly to campus. Alina placed the unsigned draft in her bag as a backup. Before leaving the store, she changed in the employee restroom. The navy dress she had bought second-hand fit more tightly than it had 2 weeks earlier. She removed her apron, folded it into her locker, then caught her reflection beneath the harsh ceiling light. She did not resemble the founders pictured on the university website. No tailored suit and no team and no glossy prototype display. Just a tired woman carrying a used laptop, a black ledger, and a silver folder with a bent corner. Alina rested one hand against the folder. Both doors, she whispered. Then she left for the learning center. The practice examination lasted 2 hours and 15 minutes. Alina completed the reading section, the mathematics section, and the written response while the clock above the whiteboard seemed louder than every pencil in the room. At 12:28, she submitted her paper. Her instructor notices the garment bag and laptop case beside her chair. Big afternoon. I hope so. You finished early. Do you want to review your essay before I collect it? Alina glanced at the clock. Reviewing might improve her score. Leaving immediately might preserve her pitch. For several seconds, she remained seated between the two futures Howard had forced into competition. Then she reopened the essay. She corrected 2 sentences, clarified 1 argument, and submitted it at 12:36. She would not let him make her education feel disposable. Outside, wet snow slowed traffic across Denver. The first bus arrived late, then stopped 3 blocks from campus because of an accident near the main entrance. Alina walked the remaining distance. By the time she reached the startup fair, it was 1:41. The verification desk had closed 11 minutes earlier. A volunteer checked her conditional card and frowned. "You missed the deadline." The deadline was changed this morning. "You'll need authorization from Dean Pierce." "Where is he?" The volunteer pointed toward the main atrium where Howard stood speaking to 2 investors beside a display of student-built medical devices. Alina approached him carefully. Howard noticed her before she reached the group, but he continued his conversation until one investor excused himself. "You are late," he said. "You moved the deadline. I adjusted verification to accommodate the event schedule. You knew I had an exam. I knew you had competing priorities." The phrase landed with deliberate precision. Alina held out the venture ledger and the pilot report draft. "Everything you requested is here." Howard did not take them. "The verification committee has already moved to finalist preparation." "Then verify me now." "That is not how the process works." A student founder at the next display stopped arranging brochures. Alina kept her voice level. "You created the review. You changed the deadline. You can complete it." Howard's eyes shifted toward the witnesses. "What I can do and what I should do are different questions." He asked her to follow him away from the investor tables. Near a service corridor, his polite expression disappeared. "You are making this unnecessarily difficult. I came with the records. You came after the deadline. A deadline you changed without notice. You received notice 5 hours before it closed." Howard exhaled through his nose. "Ms. Moore, serious founders adapt." Alina's fingers tightened around the folder. "I did adapt. I finished my exam, crossed the city in snow, and arrived with a working product and paying customers. And no verified technical background. The product is the verification. No, the product is a claim until people with expertise validate it." The words confirmed what Alina had suspected since his visit to the store. Howard did not believe work became credible when it succeeded. He believed it became credible only after someone like him gave it permission. He offered her a compromise. She could remain at the fair as a community exhibitor without presenting to investors. Her table would be moved from the finalist atrium to a side hall near the public workshops. The university would list her participation as founder development experience. Alina stared at him. "You want me to give up my pitch slot. I want to prevent an uncomfortable public dispute." "For whom?" Howard's voice dropped. "For you." He told her that investors asked difficult questions. They would notice her missing diploma, her limited resources, and the absence of a technical co-founder. A public failure, he said, could follow her longer than a quiet withdrawal. Then he glanced at her pregnancy. "You already have enough uncertainty in your life." That was the second humiliation. The first had dismissed her work. This one used her child as evidence that she should expect less. Alina felt anger rise hot and immediate, but she did not give Howard the reaction he wanted. Instead, she asked for his decision in writing. His brow tightened. "Why?" "Because you are removing an accepted finalist after changing her verification deadline. I'm offering an alternative placement. Put that in writing, too." Howard studied her. He had expected pleading, perhaps embarrassment. Instead, she had drawn a boundary that could be read later by people beyond the corridor. "I'll have the events office prepare something," he said. "No, send it from your account." A donor passing nearby slowed just enough to hear. Howard's mouth formed a thin line. "Wait here." He walked away with her conditional card. 20 minutes passed. Alina stood beside a utility door while founders carried display screens into the atrium. Through the glass wall, she could see the main stage, the investor table, and the digital clock counting toward 4. At 2:18, her phone rang. Calvin had reached campus, but security would not let him enter through the loading entrance with the sealed report. He was circling toward the public doors. At 2:24, an events coordinator named Rachel Kim arrived instead of Howard. She carried the conditional card and avoided Alina's eyes. "I've been instructed to place you in the community hall. Did Dean Pierce send the decision in writing?" Rachel hesitated. "He said the participation category was corrected." "That isn't what I asked." Rachel lowered her voice. He also reassigned your pitch slot. Alina's gaze moved to the schedule board. At 320 Northline Retail Systems had disappeared. A student food delivery app now occupied the time. The decision was no longer a threat. Howard had acted. Rachel held out the community badge. Alina did not take it. If I accept that, does it show I agreed to withdraw? Rachel's silence answered. Alina opened the silver folder and placed the badge inside without signing the attached form. Then she removed the venture ledger. What are you doing? Rachel asked. Presenting the records. To whom? Alina could see the investor panel through the atrium doors. They were reviewing finalist summaries before the next demonstrations began. Howard stood near them, relaxed, now certain that procedure had reduced her to a side hall exhibit. Alina picked up her laptop. To the people he is trying to keep from seeing them. Rachel warned that she could be removed from the event. Alina nodded once. Then she began walking toward the investor table. She was no longer trying to convince Howard Pierce that she belonged in the room. She was about to make him explain in front of everyone why he had worked so hard to keep her out. Alina reached the investor table at 2:39. Howard saw her coming and moved before she could speak. He took the live microphone from its stand, announced a brief scheduling adjustment, and asked the audience to remain patient while staff handled an unauthorized participant issue. The phrase shifted every eye in the atrium toward her. Alina stopped beside the registration table, one hand holding her laptop case and the other carrying the silver folder. Howard stood between her and the investors with the calm posture of a man certain the institution would protect him. Miss Moore, he said you were given clear instructions. I was given a changed deadline and a false choice. A few phones rose. Howard's smile remained fixed. This is exactly the kind of disruption our verification process is designed to prevent. Rachel Kim appeared near the side entrance. She looked from Howard to the unsigned community placement form still in her hand. Alina placed her laptop case on the floor. My application was accepted. I brought the records you requested. You reassigned my pitch without reviewing them. That is your interpretation. It is what happened. Howard glanced toward the campus security, then toward the investors. He needed Alina removed, but not so quickly that it appeared he feared what she carried. So he tried to make her discredit herself first. Very well, he said. Since you insist on discussing this publicly, perhaps you should explain why a university investor panel should suspend its schedule for an applicant with no diploma, no technical credentials, no incorporated development team, and no independently verified performance report. The humiliation had changed shape. I was no longer merely denying her access. I was listing every unfinished part of her life as evidence that nothing she had completed could be real. Alina felt the baby move sharply beneath her ribs. She placed one palm against her dress and waited until the movement settled. Howard mistook the pause for weakness. This is not personal, he continued. But ambition cannot replace preparation. A folder from an equivalency program is not a business qualification. His hand gestured toward the silver folder. A murmur passed through the student section. Alina remembered sitting beside her mother's hospital bed at 17, completing homework under a lamp while insurance forms covered the table. She remembered withdrawing from school because the rent was due and nobody else could work. Howard knew none of that. I did not need to. The GD folder was not shameful because her life had taken longer than his rules allowed. She lifted her chin. You're right about one thing, she said. The folder is not my business qualification. Howard's expression eased, certain she had conceded. It is my education, Alina continued, and you do not get to use it as an insult. The silence that followed was not empty. It carried the discomfort of people realizing they had watched cruelty and mistaken it for administration. One investor lowered his pen. Howard's smile vanished. This event is not the proper venue for a personal statement. You made it personal when you read my education history and decided the product could not be mine. I decided your claims lacked sufficient validation. You visited the store. I conducted a preliminary inspection. You saw the system running. I saw a basic inventory interface on an aging computer. You saw it flag a duplicated order. That proves only that a spreadsheet can identify one inconsistency. Alina opened the silver folder and removed the narrow black notebook. Howard gave a small dismissive laugh. And now we are back to handwritten notes. He addressed the audience as though teaching a lesson. Founders often become emotionally attached to early records. But notebooks are not audited financial statements, and personal effort is not the same as a viable company. He had crossed the final line. Alina had expected him to challenge the software. She had expected him to question her training. She had not expected him to attack the ledger without opening it. The notebook contained every fragile beginning. Northline had survived the first $73 payment, the cost of a replacement router, the night she refunded a store after a reporting error, and the first renewal that proved a customer wanted to stay. It was not polished. It was honest. Howard extended his hand. If you surrender the materials and leave peacefully, we can review your complaint after the event. Alina did not give him the ledger. You had 6 weeks to review my application. Then allow the appropriate office to examine it. After the investor demus close, that is not relevant. It is the only thing that is relevant. The clock above the stage changed to 2:44. 76 minutes remained before the investor window ended, but Northline no longer had a scheduled place in it. Howard signaled to a security officer near the doors. Rachel moved closer before the officer could. Dean Pierce, she said her original slot was confirmed in the system. Howard's voice sharpened. Ms. Kim, this does not involve you. I processed the schedule. You processed an administrative correction. Rachel held up the unsigned form. She did not agree to withdraw. A camera light blinked near the sponsor wall. Howard noticed it and changed his tone immediately. Of course not. No one is suggesting she voluntarily withdrew. Her status changed after she failed verification. Alina faced Rachel. Was there a committee review? Rachel's lips parted, but Howard answered first. Internal procedures are confidential. That means no, Alina said. A low voice from the investor table interrupted them. My name is Evelyn Grant. The woman who had stopped writing stood and removed her glasses. She was listed in the program as a partner at a regional venture fund specializing in retail infrastructure. Dean Pierce did the panel receive Northline's finalist summary. Howard hesitated. A preliminary summary was circulated. Was it removed after panel review? The participation issue was administrative. That was not my question. Several investors opened their folders. One man found the finalist list and traced a finger down the page. Northline is here, he said. 3 pilots, recurring revenue, inventory efficiency model. Howard's confidence thinned. The figures were self-reported. Evelyn faced Alina. Do you have original records supporting them? Yes. Howard raised the microphone again. Unverified records brought into a public dispute should not be treated as evidence. Alina held up the venture ledger. They were offered for verification and declined because the deadline had passed. The deadline you changed this morning. Howard's jaw tightened. The security officer arrived beside Alina. Ma'am, I need you to come with me. Alina's stomach dropped.
Being escorted out would do more than end
the pitch. It would create the image Howard wanted an unstable outsider removed from a professional event. Every future investor search could lead back to a video of her standing beside security. She could leave quietly and file a complaint later. She could protect herself from public embarrassment. Or she could protect the 18 months of work inside the notebook. Alina set the silver folder on the registration table. Then she opened the venture ledger to the first page. I will leave, she said after the panel sees one entry. Howard moved toward her. No, the word came too quickly. Everyone heard the fear inside it. Alina placed her finger beside the handwritten line dated 6 months earlier. Grant Street, Market First Northline installation, $73 paid. Howard reached for the notebook, but Evelyn Grant rose from her chair. Do not touch her records. He stopped. Alina began to read the next entries aloud. A software repair. A second store installation, a customer refund, a monthly renewal. Each figure was small enough to sound unimpressive alone. Together, they formed a sequence Howard could not dismiss without examining it. Then he saw the names of the pilot stores. His face changed. You could have written these at any time, he said. I could have. I sees the weakness in that answer. There. That is precisely why this is not proof. He faced the crowd again, speaking more loudly. A handwritten ledger can be manufactured. It can be backdated. It can be filled with invented customers and imaginary payments. This spectacle confirms why professional standards matter. The deepest wound was not that Howard doubted her. It was that he had now accused her of fraud in front of investors. A whisper moved through the room. Alina felt heat rise into her face, but she did not close the notebook. She asked Howard one question. If the customer names are invented, why did you ask what was in the performance report when you visited Grant Street? He faltered. Only briefly. That proves nothing. The revolving doors at the far end of the atrium opened. Calvin Ross entered carrying a sealed white envelope beneath one arm. Snow had melted across the shoulders of his brown coat. A campus security guard followed him, still arguing about visitor clearance. Calvin raised the envelope high enough for the investor panel to see. Then perhaps this will. Howard's hand lowered from the microphone. Calvin crossed the atrium and placed the sealed Pilot Store sales report beside Alina's silver folder. The accountant's signature showed through the clear document window. Evelyn Grant reached for it. Howard tried to block her. The panel cannot accept material outside the established process. Evelyn's hand remained on the envelope. Dean Pierce, she said, you are no longer deciding what this panel is allowed to examine. For the first time that afternoon, Howard had nothing ready to say. Alina stood beside the ledger, the sealed report, and the folder he had mocked. The truth had not been revealed yet, but it had finally entered the room in a form he could not order to leave. Howard Pierce recovered quickly enough to sound authoritative. A sealed envelope does not establish validity, he said. We have no confirmation of who prepared it, what methods were used, or whether the figures relate directly to Ms. Moore's software. Calvin stood beside Alina, breathing hard from the walk across campus. My accountant prepared it from 6 months of sales and inventory records. Howard barely acknowledged him. You are also her employer and first customer. That creates an obvious conflict. Calvin's voice roughened. It creates knowledge. Evelyn Grant lifted the envelope but did not open it. Mr. Ross, is this an original report? Yes. Signed by your accountant? Yes. Does the university have any rule preventing a panel from reviewing customer documentation? Howard answered before Rachel could. The concern is not merely documentation. Ms. Moore has failed to establish that she personally created the product she claims to own. Alina heard the change. The ledger could no longer be dismissed as imaginary without examining it. The customer report had arrived. So Howard moved the accusation again. Now Northline might exist, but perhaps it belonged to someone else. He pointed toward the black notebook. Those entries show purchases and expenses at most. They do not demonstrate authorship. Evelyn opened the venture ledger to the first page. The handwriting was compact and careful. Beside the $73 payment, Alina had written the first version number and a list of problems still unresolved. Duplicate deliveries not separated. Waste transfers misread as sales. Reorder trigger too aggressive. Evelyn moved to the next page. There were no inspirational slogans or inflated projections. There were dates. Corrections, failed tests, customer requests, and costs Alina had been unable to avoid. One entry recorded a $38 refund after the system had flagged a legitimate holiday order as suspicious. Another showed 6 hours spent rebuilding the dairy module without charging the store. Howard watched Evelyn reading. Again, handwritten notes can be produced after the fact. Alina reached into her laptop case. That's why the ledger does not only record payments. She opened the computer and placed it on the registration table. The casing was scratched near one hinge, and the battery warning appeared as soon as the screen woke. Howard gave the laptop a contemptuous glance. Alina entered Northline's development archive. Each software version carried a date matching an entry in the ledger. The early files were crude and incomplete. Some opened to broken reports. Others contained comments Alina had written to herself while learning how to solve each problem. She selected the version listed beside the first $73 payment. The interface showed only 4 categories and a single warning box. Then she opened the current version. The same structure remained beneath a cleaner dashboard, expanded across ordering waste transfers, supplier discrepancies, and stockout risk. Evelyn compared the dates on the screen with the notebook. They match. Howard leaned toward the laptop. Files can be renamed. Rachel Kim spoke from behind him. The application portal preserves upload dates. Howard's head snapped toward her. Rachel had opened the event management system on her tablet. Ms. Moore submitted an early product build 6 weeks ago. The file signature matches this archive. Howard's voice hardened. You are not qualified to authenticate software. No, Rachel said, but the portal is. A student founder near the stage stopped pretending to work on his display. Several others moved closer. Evelyn held the ledger open. Miss Moore, why did you record failed versions? Because customers paid for improvements, not perfection. I needed to know what each payment required me to fix. And every payment is listed here. Every dollar that entered or left Northline. Howard gestured dismissively. A handful of local fees still does not establish a scalable company. Alina met his eyes. You said the customers were imaginary. I said the entries were unverified. You said the ledger could be manufactured. It could. Then verify it. Calvin placed his driver's license and store identification on the table. I paid the first entry. He pointed to the $73 line. That amount came from Grant Street Market's operations budget. She used it to repair the ordering model after it counted damaged inventory twice. Evelyn asked, did Miss Moore design the correction herself? I watched her do it. Howard interrupted. You are not a software expert. No. I'm the man who stopped paying for peaches I didn't need. A restrained laugh moved through the audience, but Calvin did not smile. He pointed to later entries. That one is the second store installation. That is a replacement router. That is the refund she gave us when the program made a mistake. I told her to keep the money. She refused. Evelyn's finger paused beside the refund. That line mattered more than a clean revenue chart. It showed that Alina had not written a fantasy of uninterrupted success. She had recorded the moment her own product failed and the cost she accepted to make it right. The venture ledger was not only evidence that Northline earned money. It was evidence of how Alina had built trust. Evelyn finally opened the sealed envelope. Howard moved closer. I must object to the panel reviewing unscheduled material. You have objected, Evelyn said. She removed the signed pilot store sales report and placed it beside the ledger. The first page summarized 6 months at Grant Street Market. Inventory errors had fallen by more than half. Waste-related ordering had declined. Employee time spent reconciling missing stock had dropped sharply. The second page showed the result Howard had not expected. Because popular products remained available more consistently, completed sales had risen. Grant Street Market had not doubled its total sales, but it had nearly doubled the efficiency of the inventory system, supporting them processing more accurate orders with roughly half the previous correction work. Evelyn read the figures twice. Then she passed the report to the investor beside her. He compared the store results with Alina's application summary. These are the same numbers. Yes, Calvin said, only now they're final. The report moved down the table. By the time it reached the third investor, the atrium had understood what Howard was still trying not to admit. Alina had not arrived with an idea she hoped to build someday. She had built the product already. Real stores were using it. Real customers were paying her. And the handwritten notebook Howard had mocked documented the disciplined work behind every result. Howard reached for the report. This establishes that the store improved. It does not prove Northline caused every improvement. Alina opened the report to the methodology page. The accountant compared the months before installation with the 6-month pilot. Staffing stayed nearly the same. Supplier changes were separated. Seasonal sales were adjusted against the previous year. Howard scanned the page. You prepared this language. The accountant did. Calvin nodded. She asked him to make the test harder. Evelyn faced Alina. Why? Because if the numbers only worked when we protected them, they were not useful. The answer settled over the table. Howard tried one final direction. Even if we accept these results, her participation still violated verification procedures. Rachel held up her tablet. No, her application passed technical review. The additional credibility review was created after acceptance. Howard stared at her. Rachel continued, quieter but firmer. There is no committee record, no review meeting, no written standard applied to the other finalists. Howard's face tightened. These were discretionary safeguards. Applied to one founder, Evelyn said. Howard's control began to break. He accused Rachel of misunderstanding internal authority. He said Calvin's report lacked institutional review. He warned the panel that making decisions during a public confrontation would damage the fair's credibility. Each argument arrived faster than the last. Alina listened until he finished. Then she closed the laptop. I am not asking the university to excuse a missing qualification, she said. I am asking the panel to judge the qualification listed in the rules a working product with customer demand. Howard started to interrupt. Alina did not raise her voice. You asked for development history. It is in the ledger and archive. You asked for customer verification. Mr. Ross is here. You questioned the results. The signed report confirms them. She placed the silver folder beside the evidence. My GD is unfinished, Northline is not. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Evelyn collected the investor panel's folders. Dean Pierce, the panel, will complete Northline's review now. The schedule has already been reassigned. We are restoring it. You do not have authority to alter university programming. A second investor, Marcus Bell, closed his pen. We have authority over which companies we evaluate and fund. Howard's hand pressed against the edge of the table. Evelyn continued. Effective, immediately, you will not participate in finalist selection while the university reviews how Ms. Moore's acceptance was withdrawn. He stared at her as though the sentence were impossible. You cannot remove me from my own event. Rachel answered this time. The provost can. She had already sent the application record the changed deadline, and Howard's written instructions to the provost's office. A reply appeared on her screen while they stood there. An emergency review had been opened. Howard's role in finalist decisions was suspended pending that review. Security did not escort him away. There was no dramatic arrest, no instant verdict. He simply lost the power he had assumed no one would question. The microphone remained in his hand, but the event no longer waited for his voice. At 3:20, Northline Retail Systems appeared again on the stage display. Alina carried her laptop to the demonstration table. Calvin placed the sales report beside it. Evelyn kept the venture ledger open to the first page. The audience watched Alina connect the system and load a sample store file. She demonstrated how Northline caught a duplicated delivery, separated waste from sales, and prevented an unnecessary reorder. No one asked where she had studied. They asked how quickly the software could be installed. They asked what support small stores needed. They asked how much funding would allow her to build the next version. Alina answered every question without pretending to know what she had not yet solved. When the demonstration ended, Evelyn offered Northline a place in the investor finalist session and began discussing a seed funding agreement large enough to hire technical help, replace the failing laptop, and expand the pilot. Howard stood near the back of the atrium. For the first time all afternoon, he was outside the decision. Alina gathered the ledger and slid it into the silver folder. The corner was still bent where she had gripped it during his insult. She did not smooth it out. Some marks were not damage. They were proof that the thing had been carried through pressure and had remained intact. The university's review did not end that afternoon. It began there. By evening, the provost's office had collected the altered schedule. Alina's acceptance records, Rachel Kim's event notes, and the email that moved the verification deadline to a time Howard knew she could not meet. The investor panel submitted its own statement. So did Calvin. Howard remained employed while the review continued, but he no longer controlled finalist selection community, track admissions, or direct communication with applicants. The university appointed an independent committee to examine whether other founders had been screened by standards that did not appear in the published rules. No one announced that justice had been completed. They announced that authority had been limited while facts were examined. For Alina, that was enough for the first night. She returned to Grant Street Market after sunset because she had left her apron in the employee locker. The store was quiet except for the compressors humming behind the dairy cases. Calvin stood at the customer service counter with 2 paper cups of tea. You pitched to investors, he said, and you still came back for an apron. It's my only clean one. He handed her a cup. For several minutes they said nothing. The day had left Alina too tired for celebration. Her feet hurt. Her back ached. The baby pressed heavily beneath her ribs, and the adrenaline that had carried her across the atrium was fading into exhaustion. Calvin nodded toward the silver folder beneath her arm. You all right? Alina ran her thumb along the bent corner. I kept thinking that if I got into that room, I would finally stop feeling behind. And I got into the room. Calvin waited. I still have a test next month. I still owe rent. The software still crashes when stores use 2 supplier codes for the same item. He smiled. So the world remains inconvenient. Yes, but different. Alina glanced through the office window at the shelves Northline had helped keep stocked. Different. 3 weeks later, she signed Northline's first formal seed funding agreement. The amount did not make her rich. It paid for a reliable computer, legal help, secure data hosting, and a part-time developer who could strengthen the system without taking ownership away from her. The agreement also gave Northline enough runway to continue serving the 3 pilot stores while preparing for a larger test. Alina read every page before signing. Then she recorded the investment in the venture ledger. She did not replace the black notebook with a ceremonial new one. The old pages mattered too much. They showed the company before anyone important believed it was a company. Grant Street Market remained the first customer. Calvin insisted on paying the same monthly fee as every other pilot store. "I'm not becoming charity now," he told her. Northline's improved dashboard arrived before summer. It was cleaner, faster, and easier for store employees to use. Alina still tested each release behind the customer service counter before sending it anywhere else. When an update failed, she wrote it down. When a customer complained, she called back. When the numbers improved, she required proof before celebrating them. The university completed its review near the end of the semester. Howard Pierce had not falsified Alina's application, but the committee found that he had created an undocumented credibility test applied. It selectively changed her deadline without a clear operational need, and removed her from the schedule without a recorded panel decision. I was removed as incubator director. The university reassigned him to a non-selection role while his contract was reviewed. A new policy required written standards, documented appeals, and at least 2 reviewers before an accepted founder could lose a pitch slot. Rachel Kim was asked to help design the process. The university also issued Alina a public apology. She accepted the corrected record. She declined the invitation to pose beside Howard for a photograph. "I don't need him standing next to me to prove the apology happened," she said. Her GED graduation took place on a warm Friday evening in June. There was no investor banner, no startup stage, and no row of cameras. The ceremony was held in the Community Learning Center's multipurpose room beneath paper decorations taped to painted concrete walls. Folding chairs filled the floor. Families carried flowers from grocery stores and balloons that bumped against the ceiling. Alina wore a plain blue graduation gown. Calvin sat in the second row. On the chair beside him rested a small framed photograph of Alina's mother wearing her old Navy store apron. When Alina's name was called, she crossed the stage, slowly, one hand supporting the curve of her belly. The instructor gave her a certificate. Then she handed Alina the silver folder. Its bent corner was still visible. Inside were her completed examination results, her graduation record, and the photograph with her mother's handwriting on the back. "Finish what I couldn't." Alina stood beneath the weak stage lights and read the sentence once more. For years, she had understood it as a debt. That evening, it felt more like permission. She had finished school, but she had not become valuable because a document finally confirmed it. The certificate corrected an unfinished part of her past. It did not create the mind that had built Northline. After the ceremony, Calvin took a photograph of her outside the learning center. The sunset reflected across parked cars and traffic moved along the Denver street behind her. Alina held the certificate in one hand and the venture ledger in the other. She laughed when Calvin told her the picture made her look too serious. "I'm trying to hold my whole life at once." "You've been doing that for years." 2 months later, Alina's daughter was born healthy. She named her Mira after her mother. On quiet mornings, Alina brought the baby to Grant Street Market before opening. Mira slept in a carrier, while Alina checked Northline's overnight reports and listened to Calvin complain about supplier codes. Nothing about those mornings resembled the dramatic victory strangers expected after hearing her story. There were bottles to warm bugs to fix invoices to send and classes she still wanted to take. But the work belonged to her. So did the company. So did the education she had completed on her own terms. The silver folder remained on a shelf above Alina's desk beside the venture ledger. One represented a promise carried through grief. The other represented an idea carried through doubt. Neither was valuable because Howard Pierce had finally been overruled. They were valuable because he had tried to make Alina ashamed of both, and she had refused. People often confuse credentials with ability because credentials are easier to recognize from across a room. But how many capable people are dismissed before anyone bothers to examine what they have actually built? Share your thoughts in the comments. And subscribe for more stories about ordinary people whose quiet work becomes impossible to ignore.